Wonderful. I am so excited to have this conversation today. Jen Rivera Bell and Ashley Renne Nsonwu. I should have checked with you first. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Nsonwu, yeah.
Okay, perfect. I have been following both Jen and Ashley for a long time, and it's just been wonderful to connect a little bit over Instagram and to finally make this podcast happen. So I've given my listeners a brief introduction to you both in the episode introduction, but if you would like to go ahead, I would love whoever wants to start. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, like who you are and what you're passionate about and the beloved people in your life. And then also what was like a, condensed version of your tipping point for adopting a vegan diet?
Sure. You want to go ahead, Jen?
Sure, I'll go ahead first.
Okay.
So my name is Jen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a mama to two kiddos, and I live here in Southern Louisiana with my husband, Zach, with our two pigs and now three dogs. And our vegan story is probably my favorite vegan story, like of anyone. And we actually went vegan because we adopted our pet pig, and we got our pet pig at the worst time ever. Both me and my husband were in college, and I was living in a studio apartment. So obviously getting a farm animal was like the best choice in my life at that point. And funnily enough, like, we got her and it was a terrible idea, clearly. We lived upstairs and it was awful. It was chaos. She used the bathroom inside my apartment because we couldn't take her out because I wasn't allowed to have pets, much less a farm animal. And so it was chaos, but within that chaos, we realized just, how much of a personality she had. And she really was much like a dog and like loved us and followed us around. And we were like, wait, she's kind of like a dog. And does that mean we can't eat pork? And we were like, okay, yeah, we can't eat pigs anymore because that would just be weird. And then from there, it kind of spiraled, and we started watching a couple documentaries and, going down that rabbit hole and realizing, the sentientness of all these animals that we were consuming on a daily basis. I'm Salvadorian and my husband is Cajun. And so a lot of our food culture revolves around pork. And so that was like a huge step for us to just kind of be like, okay, we can't do this. And then, we let go of chicken and pork and beef and all of that and realized that it was these animals that we did not want to be harming. And so from then we kind of just went full circle, and we realized the environmental impact and kind of got into minimalist living, and then all of these social issues that go along with it. And so that was really our tipping point, is Mowgli coming into that little tiny studio apartment and showing her personality, and us realizing that these animals want to be free and be happy and just live.
I love that story. That's beautiful.
Okay, so I guess I'll go next. So just a little bit about me. My name is Ashley Renne Nsonwu. I'm a Black and South Asian, specifically Indian, environmental activist, a vegan mom, and an entrepreneur. And I use my platform to try to help other parents and vegan families try to navigate these challenges of raising kids on a planet that is rapidly changing. So I have a 1-year-old son. His name is Beyond, and he is my world. And my husband, his name is Carl. He really, really, really wanted kids. I did not when we first got together, but he took a chance and married me anyway, hoping that I would change my mind. And I did. I came around, and it's like one of those cliche things where like, now I can't imagine my world without him. It's like, it's so true. Like when I became a mom, it was just like life-changing for me. And bonus, like he is a bona fide vegan foodie. It's like wild. Like I can't get over just like how much he loves what I cook, especially because I never used to like to cook. Like my husband actually did all the cooking. And then I only got into cooking because my son loved our cooking so much. So I was like, oh, this actually is satisfying. So now I enjoy cooking. And it's because of this little guy and this response that I've gotten online from posting what he eats, that I actually decided to do a cookbook. So I'm publishing a vegan kids cookbook, next year. Really
Oh
excited
my
about it.
gosh.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so it's basically going to serve as like a guide and a cookbook that's just going to be filled with vegan kids recipes for like babies, toddlers, and beyond. not the name of my son, and as well as sustainability tips for families. So I'm excited about all that. And I guess, so what inspired me to go vegan in the first place, I actually remember the exact moment, and it was because of cows. Growing up, I had honestly just never really questioned the dairy industry. You know, I was raised on dairy. It was just always a part of my life. And then in 2016, everything changed because I saw a video of a mother cow who was chasing down this truck that had just ripped her newborn calf away from her. And I just remember her sad desperation and the pain in her wails. And I cried because it was just like in that moment that I'd finally made this connection that, oh, wow, animals are really not ours to exploit. Why have I never thought about this? And I just couldn't believe I never challenged, you know, the normalcy of consuming milk that just wasn't made for us, right? And so it's specifically made to nourish, you know, the baby of the mother who produced it. But I just never thought of it that way. And then I think becoming a mom made that even more real for me. Because when I became a mom myself and experienced breastfeeding and pumping for the first time, you know, every time I would pump, I would just feel so bad for cows and just be like, wow, yeah, you know, it's messed up what they go through. So yeah, that's how I ended up going vegan. It was literally because of a cow who completely changed how I viewed, you know, the food system. So I went vegan that day and I never looked back.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's amazing. I love hearing everybody's stories because it's always so different, you know, even if it's like, you know, both of you kind of had an animal who was your inspiration to becoming vegan, but such a different experience and a story. And for me, it wasn't even animals first. It was like health reasons. And that's why like I love in this podcast series so far, we've been covering every aspect I could possibly think of that relates to being vegan, and like, you know, physical health benefits and risks if there are any, and like the climate impact, and then animal rights and human rights and more. There's so much more in this series. And I'm trying to ask all of the tough questions. I'm trying to just come at this as like authentically and real as possible. And that's honestly pretty easy because I was there before. Like I was already thinking these things before, as I'm sure both of you were too, because you said that neither of you really ever questioned like the normalcy of this, and eating animals was just what we did. So anyway, I've been thinking through like, you know, all the questions and thoughts I used to have, putting them on the table. All that to say, in this episode, I'm excited because we're going to dive right into like the deep stuff. And I know that in what we talk about today, kind of focusing on like, you know, ethics, family, traditions, culture around food, all of that, everybody still is going to have their own opinions. Everybody listening, like their opinions may be different from ours, and that's totally fine. But I did want to hear, because both of you are very like vocal about this on your social media platforms, through like Jen for you, YouTube and podcasts and Instagram. And Ashley, I know you've also been over like on YouTube and Pinterest, and definitely Instagram is where I've been following you most right now. So in this current time, more global awareness has been raised regarding social justice and human rights issues, and then particularly in the United States, the continued systematic oppression and racism, and all of those forms of injustice in the United States. So one perspective I've been hearing, like that I want to be very sensitive towards, because I want to lead this conversation from a place of empathy. And a lot of people feel that pushing for a vegan world, you know, like a plant-based diet for everybody, is just another form of like a Eurocentric colonialism. And that this diet is like dismissing entire groups of people around the world and traditions, people who are geographically located in regions that are more conducive to like animal agriculture rather than growing crops, or people who live in food deserts, and so they don't have the same access to healthy like vegan options. I guess I'm just throwing all that information out there, and I don't even have a well-worded question other than just what are your thoughts on that? And maybe we can figure out just a flow of conversation from there.
So like just one particular thing that I picked out of what you said, like food deserts, in for example, you mentioned. That's why to me, veganism, like while for me in particular, as an ethical vegan, animal rights is kind of like the core reasoning for it. But if your veganism doesn't have food justice, then it's not encompassing all that it needs to. There are people here in the United States. We like to think of these, you know, faraway places where people don't have access to food. It's here in our
Mm-hmm.
communities, down the road, down the street.
Mm-hmm.
And so these people who want access to healthy foods, want access to local foods that are rich in nutrients, but do not like are not able to get it. So if we're not battling those barriers, there's a whole gap in our activism. Like we have to tackle those things if we are truly trying to have this world where everyone's plant-based and, all of these things. When guess what? At that grocery store, so many grocery stores in my neighborhood that all that they have there is boudin and cracklins. And guess what that's made out of? Extremely processed animal products. And that's all that there is to eat. And so for us to be like, wow, like why aren't you eating all of these vegan things when they're not even there, they don't even exist, much less fresh foods. Like we take it for granted. As a privileged person who can just go into the grocery store and get whatever I want at the grocery, so many people don't live that reality. And for me to shame someone for not eating the way that I eat, when a lot of times they do not have that access. And so for me personally, my veganism has to have food justice involved in it for me to truly want, this, hypothetical vegan world that we're trying to achieve. And so if we're not all looking at it from that aspect, we're missing a huge chunk of what we can do as vegan activists, as people who are speaking out.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
before you dive in, Ashley, I'm curious, Jen, if you could expand, what does that look like for you? Like, how does that focus take place in your life?
And so for every person, whatever capacity that you have is going to look very different. Whether that is going into the school systems, because oftentimes, at least in my community, we live in a town that has huge rates of poverty. And so oftentimes school is where most of the children are getting their nourishment from. That is the basis of where their calories are coming from. So oftentimes it's going to the schools, and from there going to the school board offices and seeing, okay, why is it that our children are getting ketchup as a vegetable today? Or why is it that we're, simple things like that oftentimes, like you mentioned before, we live in a world where we don't question a lot of this stuff. It's like, oh, okay, like this is just what we eat, we're just so used to it. And just something as simple as that, going to school and being like, hey, why are these children not being provided something slightly more nutritious? And then from there, that there's endless amounts of ways that we can advocate for different businesses that refuse to open in certain areas because of maybe food stamps availability or whatever the case may be. There's so many different things that we can do that are small steps. It's not the solution, because there is no like, oh, we're just going to do this and everything's going to be solved, but very small steps. And also there are people oftentimes in the community that are already working on these sorts of issues. And so raising their voices and advocating for whatever issues they're already rallying for can be.
Oh, I think we lost you that last little bit. You had said rallying for, and then it cut out.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just rallying for those people who are already in the movement, and hearing out their concerns, hearing out what steps they're already taking to bring that progress over. Because oftentimes, especially when it comes to veganism, we see ourselves as the solution when oftentimes there are already people out there who are advocating. We might not be listening to them. Whether that goes for Black Lives Matter or trans issues, whatever the case may be, these activists are already out there. We just need to listen. We need to listen to what it is that they're saying.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Ashley, what do you think about all that?
Oh, I 100% agree. Gosh, with everything that she said, just going back to the food deserts issue, it's interesting because it's like, okay, I understand where vegans are coming from 100% when they say, hey, I want a vegan world. Look, I do too. But we can't move towards that without first addressing the issues. Like at the very least, acknowledge all of the intersectional issues that exist within, veganism, and then we can work on solutions, to help make that vision somewhat a reality one day, hopefully, right? But we can't do that without you first acknowledging, these problems. And these are issues that very much exist, of course, within marginalized communities, of course. And when you think about the modern day, movement around veganism, and while I am an ethical vegan, the modern day version of veganism very much, centers the white perspective. And so when you center the white perspective in the veganism movement, especially, if you're able-bodied, if you are wealthy, if, you're mostly just only talking about animals, you're only talking about health, then you miss out on the issues that exist in other communities that, with people that don't look like you. And if we, and it just seems like such a misstep because it works against, your goals, right? Because if we want to work together to make this, this beautiful future that we want, we have to include everybody and work with everybody to see how we can realistically make it possible for everyone. So I know for me, like I'm really, really into policy changes because there's only so much that we can do, right, as individuals. Because if you live in an area where you don't have access to nutritious food, what can you do? You're only going to be able to eat what's provided to you. And that can only change with, the businesses and governments changing. So I'm more so interested in like, how can we get businesses to step up to, help make this possible? How can we include the government to make more vegan friendly policy changes? Because without the help of, the corporations and businesses, changing policies and making it accessible to people who currently don't have access, then this is just never going to happen. It's just not realistic. So it's just very important to make sure you include, the voices of people who, don't have access to this lifestyle, instead of erasing them. Obviously, me as an ethical vegan, I very much care about animals and animal welfare, and my veganism centers around the welfare of animals. And I have a problem with the consumption of animals and treating them as products. But we can't expect to solve any problems on a global scale without addressing the horrific industries behind it and the capitalistic nature of the movement that comes with the direct harm of BIPOC communities. So intersectionality is an important discussion. And I think that, nuance is just lacking in general on the internet, but especially with like the modern day vegan movement. And we have to make sure we're including everyone in the conversation.
100%. And it sounds like both of you had mentioned, policy change as a huge proponent in getting all this movement forward, and being able to be more inclusive of all people and bring just what should be equitable to everybody to the table. So it sounds like voting is a huge piece of this, like those who are able to vote, using their voices in that way. And then, like campaigning, signing petitions, I would imagine using your voice, like physically present if you're, marching or bringing attention to something like that. But do both of you have suggestions for how else you personally push for policy change, or have had experience with like your community in that form?
So like what I had mentioned of just going to the school system and the school board system here for us personally, we are in one of the most impoverished area in terms of funding for our school system. And, every year we have cuts, and every year it's worse and worse in terms of being able to provide not only adequate education, but also food. Like I mentioned, like that is a huge deal here. And
Mhm.
so being able to go, and again, I'm a regular person. I'm not any sort of like super famous politician that I'm able to just be like, oh, we should do this and people are just going to do it. It's really having these one-on-one conversations with people who do have the power. Because oftentimes I think that we forget that so much of the policies that we have in place are created by our local government. We have issues at every state of government, and I am, one of those loud people that talk about it all the time. But the reality is that we do have a lot of power when it comes to our local government, and being able to elect these people who are making huge decisions, especially when it comes to the budget, which a lot of the issues are around who gets money and who doesn't and why. And so I feel like for me in particular, being able to go talk to these people directly. And oftentimes, at least with the people that I've met, they're very nice people who do want changes, but sometimes they may have been led in the wrong direction or think that this might just be easier because everyone's, kind of okay with it, or maybe no one's rattling the cages enough. But doing simple things like that can really alter the way that people in power see us, which, are the people who they are trying to serve. And so something as simple as that can really be so impactful in changing, even if it's one day out of the week, to be able to provide more greens on their plate, or being able to add water instead of just milk with their lunches, like something radical like that. Simple things that, again, my whole childhood, all I had was a glass of milk with my lunches, and I actually never liked drinking it, so I just didn't drink anything. And so something as simple as like, hey, can we allow them to use the water fountain when they're eating? As simple as that can change the trajectory of something as drastic as their everyday lunches.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's actually where I was going to go to, start them when they're young, right? So I feel like if you can completely change the school systems, you're going to impact, future generations going forward and how they're able to adopt, plant-based food into their lives and just lifestyle changes in general. And, it makes me think about how when I first enrolled Beyond in school or daycare, whatever you want to call it. And it was really interesting because I told them, hey, he's vegan. Will you be able to accommodate this? And, they're like, hey, yeah, you can, work with the chef. We'll give you the menu in advance and you can just look at what's on the menu and then bring in like vegan versions of whatever's on the menu, or you can bring in like vegan ingredients to replace like the dairy options or the meat options that are on the menu. And it just sounded really complicated. And so I was like, hey, I'm just going to pack his lunch every day, and just call it a day. And then, I asked about, beverage options, and I was like, he loves water, so he's good with water. And they're like, oh well, it's required by the state that they drink milk with their food. And I said, required by the state. And I was like, okay, well, he has a dairy allergy, so what are you going to do about that? And they said, oh, well, you know what? We're not gonna force you to bring milk or have us serve milk. So it was just like, wow, like there has to be policy changes, because to require the school system to serve milk as a beverage, to me, is just ridiculous. And we have to also understand that this is a power play, right? Because
Mhm.
who's in the government's pockets? The dairy industry. Who's in the government's pocket? The meat industry. So you have what's called, lobbying. And so you have meat lobbies, you have dairy lobbies, and they are very powerful because they have a lot of money. And it just goes to show that sometimes when an industry has a lot of money, billions of dollar industries, they're able to influence policy in a way that, a lot of us who want to see positive changes cannot. And so I've actually been looking and researching into, why can't we have a lobby? Why can't vegans have like some one massive lobby so that we can influence policy changes? And I think that that's a real conversation that maybe we need to start having in the vegan community to try to figure out how we can implement wide scale policy change through the power of our money and our groups that we form to, talk to the government and kind of go toe to toe with the meat and dairy industry. Because until we're able to do that, I don't see how we're going to be able to get the government to budge, because they are making this a requirement in schools. You can see it in the school systems. You see it in the school lunches. You see it in, the fact that they're required to serve milk as a beverage. And it's ridiculous. Like, why would you require milk over water?
Mm-hmm.
Water is so nourishing. It's so good for you. Why would you require milk over water, especially with all of the research that shows, how damaging milk can be for our bodies?
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to take a really big effort as individuals. What we can do is put pressure on, our government officials. We can put pressure on corporations to step up and try to influence policy changes. And one example of that is Impossible Foods. And I know that's controversial in the vegan community because, some vegans might say that, hey, Impossible Foods is not necessarily healthy, right? But they are very popular and they have a lot of money and they have a lot of power. And they were able to help California actually put a huge sum of money towards implementing or expanding the plant-based and sustainable food options in California. So they did that with the help of Impossible Foods. So regardless of how you might feel of a particular company, I think it would be really helpful to reach out to a lot of companies and put pressure on them to use their power and their profits to try to implement policy changes, because we're going to need the help of these corporations, and we're going to need the help of the government. It's going to take the work of all of us kind of like coming together to kind of implement wide-scale change. And unfortunately, money is a big driver of that. So I think that's one cool idea that we can do as individuals. If we're not willing to, go to school systems or go to our elected officials, we can very easily send out social media, messages, tweets, comment on corporations' posts and like really urge them to play a bigger role in policy changes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both so much for sharing your perspectives and suggestions, really powerful suggestions for how individuals can get involved, because I think sometimes, myself included, we can look at the news, we can look at, these huge systems, the infrastructure that's around us, the government, that we don't feel like we always have power to change, especially without a whole bunch of money at our disposal. And it can feel very, very hopeless. But then I remind myself that Impossible Foods, for example, like you shared, Ashley, the reason that they have become so popular, the reason that they have so much money is because of consumer demand. Like,
Yep.
If we're the ones who are demanding more plant-based options, and totally agree, like the argument about processed versus like, whole foods that are not processed, like that, if we just put that aside,
Yeah.
the reason that they are so popular is because we've demanded it. So our voices do matter. And I love both of your suggestions, especially with like getting involved in our school systems, with our kids, just kind of putting questions in people's heads too, like the teachers, like why is this a thing in the classroom? Like, who could they talk to that maybe they have more influence within their school, like board of directors and everything. So, thinking kind of on the flip side of this question though, let's say that we did, push for so much more like education and awareness and policy change, and we were successful. And so now there are more equitable, accessible options out there for all people to have a vegan diet, just with like healthy plant-based foods. The flip side, I guess, would be, is that, like, what are your thoughts? Is that still another form of like Eurocentric colonialism? Is that, I don't want to use the word right, because right is a very like just vague term, but is that ethical to push for that? Do you think that it is erasing people's cultural identities, to even be pushing so hard for like a vegan diet?
So I see that from like so many different angles. So on one hand, I don't think it's ever right for us to go to, the indigenous Inuits in Alaska and be like, hey, stop eating the seals. None of us have the right to do that, just period. Um, but on the flip side, apart from these cultural groups that do survive primarily on animal products who are isolated in these locations where there is no even capacity for them to be growing spinach and all of that. The majority of our food as people of color has stemmed from heavy plant food. Being an indigenous person from El Salvador, 90% of the food that we ate traditionally was vegan. It was on accident, but it was vegan food. Arroz con frijoles and calabaza, all these amazing, delicious food that I was able to like rediscover because it was like, wait, all of this super terrible food that was pushed upon us was actually through colonialism. And that's the case with a lot of people. And so I think that that's been a really cool aspect of veganism, that I was able to reconnect with my ancestral foods in a way that I never would have, because I was able to realize all of these foods that were deemed as, comida india, in my terms, Indian food, as they would say, is an insult to us because, if you have money, if you are Americanized, you can eat McDonald's, you can eat Burger King, you can eat whatever if you go to the city. But my food is deemed as poor people food because all you're eating is rice and beans and whatever. And so to me, to be able to acknowledge that and be able to be so proud of that food, I think it's done the opposite. And that's not the case for everyone. I know that there are people who come from cultures where, animal products are higher on their desirability, even pre-colonization. But for us, that just wasn't the case. And so being able to eat these foods and not only just enjoy them because they're bomb as hell, but just like also feel so connected to my ancestors. Like this is what they ate, this is what they grew. And so I can totally see how people can push for veganism from a white veganism perspective, and it could be so toxic. But on the flip side, I think that a lot of us are able to reconnect with our ancestral foods, and that in and of itself is super cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that because it's interesting because, some people will say that like okay, I'll use Africa as an example. So my father is Jamaican and Black American. My mother is Indian. Both cultures on both sides of the family have ties to veganism, right? So, we think about my mother being from India, we think about my father being half Jamaican, and then on the other side, Black American. Going back to Africa, it was actually colonialism that introduced, meat heavy diets to the continent. And so, it's not really about going vegan as much as it is about going back to veganism. And like she said, it's like really about getting in touch with like your ancestral roots in a way, versus being, forced to, join this like new vegan movement. Many of us, in terms of BIPOC individuals, are actually seeing veganism as a way to kind of reconnect with our roots. So I 100% agree with her on that front. And then, when we're talking about indigenous populations, it's interesting because I've heard some people, say that vegans talk about how, oh yeah, everyone needs to go vegan, including like indigenous people, and indigenous people get harassed. But like the people that I know, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm Black in India, like I don't see anybody in my community, harassing indigenous people about veganism. So that might be a white veganism thing, which is white veganism is actually a term that I learned from Isaiah Hernandez, also known as queer brown vegan, on the internet. And when I first learned it, I was like, oh wow, that actually makes sense, because I know, from my standpoint, or at least in my community, we've always understood the intersectionality between, veganism and other issues, and we don't force these beliefs on, other people and other cultures, especially cultures who don't have access to this lifestyle, because like we were saying earlier, it's not accessible to everyone, and the food system worldwide is just not designed for veganism. It's not. And so trying to force this onto people who don't have that kind of access, or it's not a part of their culture, or, they live off of land and, hunting is a necessity for their survival. That, how does that help? You have to understand that veganism is not just about animal rights, it's also about human rights. And if you're talking about basically killing people because you care about animals, then you're not really vegan, because you can't fight for animals without also caring about human life. And if somebody requires hunting in order to survive, then you're literally saying, go F yourself, die, because you need to hunt animals to survive. And that just doesn't fly. And anyone who puts that kind of pressure or shames other cultures who require hunting to literally live their lives, it's ridiculous. And that's definitely a white centric point of view, and it comes from privilege, and not compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then there's the fact that Indigenous people all over the world have pretty much have had their cultures, robbed from them, have had it stolen, have had it whitewashed, degraded, all because of colonialism. And so, with veganism being an ethical stance, it's just important to just remember to have nuance in every conversations that you have, and like really be considerate of other people's traumas and experiences, and realize that your ability to be vegan is not the same as somebody else's ability to be vegan. And especially when we're talking about cultures that have had their cultural identity literally torn from them and shred to pieces over a number of years, if this is their way to be connected to a culture that has been completely destroyed, then let them be. Like, I don't get that. Like I said, like, it hasn't been an issue in my community of vegans. So when I hear people kind of bring that up, it just baffles me. Like, really, this is what we're doing? We're harassing Indigenous communities about them hunting. Let's stop doing that, guys.
Yeah.
So I think it's so interesting, Ashley, because I've had the same exact reality of like, my vegan friends are cool. I don't know what vegans y'all are talking to, but that sounds awful. Like, and then I hear these horror stories of these like racist vegans and sexist vegans and all of these isms that I'm just like,
What?
I thought like we love chicken so much that we don't eat them. Like, can we please have the same decency with other human beings and like love them? Because I mean, and again, I guess that goes back to like, us having these identities, and so we're able to see people more wholly, I guess, like fully as human beings. I don't know, maybe that's our wild thought, that people have humanity, but it's so true. Like, how is it that you're fighting so hard for for example, the life of a chicken or the life of a cow, but then you can't look at another human being and give them that same decency? It's just baffling.
It is baffling. Yeah, like you said, like my vegan friends are cool. I mean, I don't have very many, but like the vegan community that I surround myself with, especially online, like we don't have those problems.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always so wild hearing that. When, like I said, when I first came across the term white veganism, I was like, what is this? This is a thing?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I don't know those people. I don't know those vegans.
I'm so glad that both of you don't, and that you haven't had to be harassed or treated in any of those ways that are honestly just so the opposite of what it even means to embrace being vegan. Like, that should just be living compassionately and not causing any unnecessary harm to anybody, any living creature. And hesitant to even say this because I think it's a whole tangent that I don't know if we even have time for in this episode, but my take on this, like, maybe the root of the white centric, like Eurocentric veganism. I think that, like you said, so much of this colonialism that has already like spread through different countries, different continents across the globe, it's impacted people. It's brought meat and dairy products, even the more like processed foods into those parts of the world where that was not a thing before in these cultures. It comes from a very, how do I say this? It's all very religious focused too, because I think that all of the this is where I'm like, I don't know if we want to go here, but in these forms of colonialism, it's almost always been with a very religious mission. And I think that for a lot of white people who have grown up, this is just like the norm, like certain ways of living, this is just normal in white communities. I think that the savior complex is a really big deal. And I think, to me, that's why there's a root of white vegans trying to push this on everybody and mandating it from all people groups, even indigenous cultures. Like, it's because of this deeply rooted savior complex that like we have to save the world. And whether that's from a religious perspective or it kind of bleeds into other areas, like we need to make you think like we think, we need to make you eat like we eat. Even from a very well-intended, like, good-hearted place, like I understand the perspective of feeling like, okay, climate change is nearly irreversible at this point, like there's so much damage that we've done. So I feel the sense of urgency sometimes to like, okay, if if we know that a vegan diet would drastically change what's happening to our planet, then like we should all do that. But I think, again, you can easily fall into a savior complex, especially if it's been very normal in, your upbringing as a white person. So I'm just going to leave that there. What if you have any thoughts? I'd love to hear them. And if not, we do not have to go there.
I will just say, like, I totally get it. Like, as somebody who went vegan for animals, I totally understand why, I understand the notion behind, white veganism and trying to save all the animals and trying to, save the world from itself. I mean, literally, like human caused, or sorry, what I'm trying to say. Oh, so climate change that has been caused by human activity is very real. And going vegan can help with that. I mean, the facts are there, like the stats are there that, the meat and dairy industry on a low end, right, is causing 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And that's a conservative estimate, with estimates being as high as 50%. So, I mean, if you mean to tell me that like if everyone could change their diet and go vegan, that could literally save the planet, I get it. It's like, why not do it? It just makes sense, but the world just doesn't work like that. And, at the end of the day, it's really hard because I get it. I have so much passion when it comes to veganism. I don't like what's happening to animals. It crushes me. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in the twilight zone, that this is even happening, that we live in a world where this is okay. But we also have to understand that, like, at some point we weren't vegan, right? And at some point we weren't vegan, and we didn't know, we didn't understand, like this world just wasn't designed for a vegan lifestyle. And so it's going to take a lot of work to help shift that perspective. And it's not something that you can just force on people. And it's unrealistic to, get so angry at people for not thinking the way you think. You didn't grow up thinking this way either. Many people didn't. So, it's just if you want to be realistic about it, like you have to be compassionate, you have to be gentle, and you have to be understanding, and really understand that not everyone can think the way you do, and some people won't even go vegan for the same reason that you went. Like, it hurts my feelings sometimes when people say, oh, I don't care about the animals, like I just care about the planet, or I just care about my my health. But it is what it is. You can't force your ways on people, but what you can is do your best and try to, help tackle like the bigger issues, which is the policy changes that need to be made, and, the corporations, the greedy corporations that need to change their ways. So, do what you can do as an individual and try to create change in the way that you can, but don't do it in a way that oppresses other people, because that's not vegan, because that's not compassionate. So that's my take on it. That's how I feel. And it's a nuanced conversation. It's a very complex conversation. And I don't have all the answers, and no one person does. But it's just, I think it's our duty to just try our best to do what we can without harming other people in the process.
Absolutely. And I think that, like you had mentioned, that whole concept of the white savior bleeds into everything, not just veganism, but like I said, if you see these issues that are happening, 9 times out of 10, the person from the marginalized community is out there yelling about it, but we're not listening. And so we don't have to swoop in and be like, oh, I have the solution to all of these problems. It's like, hey, what are the solutions that you have been already thinking about for all of these years that no one's been listening? Let me uplift you with that. And another thing that you said of this, like, what is right? What is not right? And how that stems from colonialism and Christianity and all of these concepts. And just like a small example of that is, I've gotten so much angry comments about the fact that my children will eat their food with their hands, or will eat like straight up like with a tortilla. And it's like, what? They're doing it the wrong way, right? They're not eating with a fork and spoon. It's like, my people have literally been eating with a tortilla, or like that's how like we've eaten. And to me, that's the right way. I'm not gonna go judge some white American family and be like, why aren't you eating your spaghetti with your tortilla? Like, this is so wrong. Like, no, let people do what they see fit, like in terms of that. Because like you said, like that just like reminded me so much of like what is right, what is wrong. And we say that with a capital, R. What is right? And 9 times out of 10, if you dig a little bit deeper, it's like, oh, it was colonialism that made us think that, or oh, it was Christianity that brought these ideas and made us think that what we do as a people is wrong, and that's just, so much unpacking that needs to be done there. And it takes years for us to like really realize like, oh, I've been doing this, or I've been saying this, or I've been thinking this of people, when really it was just a mindset that was forced upon me and wasn't even my idea anyways. And that goes with veganism. Like, oh, what you mean this burger is actually a part of a cow's body? Like, I never even thought about that. And it's just like questioning. We have to question everything, even within the vegan community. Okay, why is it that we say things like that? Why is it that we think that way? Because there's always room to grow. We're not at this finite point of like, oh, I'm a zero waste vegan activist and like I'm done, I have all the answers. There is no point that we get to when we're done. And I know that it sucks a lot for people, because they're like, okay, I'm zero waste now, I'm vegan now, I'm doing this now, I'm minimalist. And it's like, okay, now what? And it's like, no, guess what? There's another documentary you could probably listen into. And there's like a bunch of other issues as to why this is a problem, And like you said, we don't live in a vegan world. We don't live in a zero waste world. We don't live in a world that is conducive to that. We have to break down the structures that are there and rebuild them again, so that it is easier to be zero waste, so that it is easier to be vegan. Because right now, for a vast majority of people, it's not convenient, it's not easy, and sometimes it's not even possible.
Yeah. Ooh, well said.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so, every time so far that I've had these conversations on this podcast, I'm just so deeply grateful that I can talk with so many wonderful people who have incredible experiences and knowledge to share. And this conversation has been just filling me up so much. And I'm just thankful for everything that you both shared. I know that we're starting to run low on time, but I did want to hear, let me see if I can condense. I want to put like one last question out there, and then also my like routine question I ask everybody. You've both touched on this a little bit with your families, and how like being vegan does not mean that you have to give up all these foods that you love. Like, you, if anything, you've expressed that you've actually found a new appreciation for cooking, or for your like, your family histories and cultural recipes and all that. So, and Ashley, you're putting together an entire vegan cookbook that I cannot wait for kids. So if you could share from like a parenting perspective, what has it been like to, raise your vegan families? What are you like hyper focused on or aware of these days, or what's something that's like challenging that you've encountered? You've shared already some like school challenges. But I would love if you could share that, and then also like wrapping up the episode with 1 to 3 actionable steps that our listeners could take to just deepen their understanding about veganism across cultures and across family traditions.
So I think that I'm coming from a super privileged corner because I have the best family, y'all. And I say that all the time. And I feel so awful because I get questions all the time of like, hey, my mom is harassing my children in order to eat something. I have zero experience with that. My mom, who is sitting right there trying to feed me more food, is awesome with the kids. And she's been eating plant-based for several years now, and the rest of my family is so accommodating. And anytime that I go to my cousin's house or my aunt's house, they always have like soy milk for us or like some vegan cheese so that we can make grilled cheese. And so I think that that has put me in a corner where I hardly even have to think about veganism, especially from the fact that we also homeschool our kids. And so we don't have to deal with that extra barrier that a lot of parents have to deal with. And so for me, my family Salvadorian, and for them to be able to be like, oh, just bring some of your cheese and we'll make your pupusas. Or Zach's family, who is traditional Cajun people, and they're like, hey, did you bring your chicken so we can make this for you? And they're just so loving and awesome, and will be like, oh, honey, don't eat that one. That one has milk in it. I made you this one. It's something that I know so many people don't have. And so anytime that I get these questions, it's like, I honestly don't even know, because I'm living almost kind of like in a bubble, really. Like sometimes I'm like, wow, like it's almost too easy, because everyone's like, oh, we're making s'mores, but we got the kids their marshmallows and their chocolate, so don't worry about it. And so being able to be that lucky that I just float in the world almost as if I'm not vegan, because everyone's so accommodating. I'm just like in this little bubble of veganism and everyone's just like super cool about it, that honestly, I don't know those struggles that many people have to face.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, on my end, from the perspective of a vegan mom, one thing I want other parents to know is to not go into this uneducated. I mean, you can go into this uneducated, but when you do, make sure you are going into it with the purpose of learning everything you can about nutrition. Because even without being vegan, over like 90% of Americans have a nutrient deficiency. And that's because comprehensive nutrition education isn't a priority in schools. And it's especially problematic when you're talking about plant-based nutrition. That especially isn't being taught to our kids. So when you are going into veganism, it's very important to like treat it just like you would like trying any new diet. Like when you were younger, right? Like you weren't just born understanding how to cook meat. You weren't just born, cooking you weren't just born knowing, intuitively how to make meals. Like you had to learn these skills, like from your parents or from watching other people, pop culture, what have you. Like you learned this as you grew up. So when you go vegan, it's the same thing. It's like you're having to relearn this all over again. So, educate yourself on nutrition, educate yourself on vegan cooking, because you're going to get the biggest health benefits from being vegan by learning how to cook your own meals. And it's just amazing, because going vegan, I feel like my world just opened up to a whole plethora of new ingredients, new spices, new herbs, new foods that I just never even thought to try when I wasn't vegan. And I realized, like looking back on my diet before I went vegan, and it was very minimalistic and lacking. And who knows what kind of nutrient deficiencies I actually had before I went vegan, because I would argue that a lot of vegans become almost like borderline experts on nutrition because of all the pressure people put on them to, be perfect, because there's this assumption that when you go vegan, you're going to lack all the nutrients that you need to survive and thrive. And so you have to be on it. You have to be on it to know all of the nutrition information when you go vegan. But some people don't. There's still some people who don't understand that you need to supplement with B12. And I have to tell them, like, hey, like, this is something that you actually need to supplement with. And, don't get offended when people try to tell you that, oh, vegans have to supplement. Like, okay, so do you. Everyone should be supplementing. It's not just a vegan thing. Like, don't let those jabs like get to you. It's actually like a problem for everyone, regardless of the diet. But for parents, like, really, really, really get to know and get educated on nutrition. There are books out there. There's plenty of education online. I actually, took a course on it. I did a plant-based nutrition program, and they had a whole section on, childhood nutrition. So the information is out there. You just have to do your research, just as you would anything else that you were, trying for the first time, and just really get comfortable with it, and don't get intimidated by it. There's plenty of resources out there. There's groups out there that are designed to help people. There's actually a really good Facebook group called the Vegan Baby Led Weaning Group. So if you're a vegan parent, if you have like a child and you want to do baby led weaning and you want to raise your child vegan, that would be a great group for you to join. There are plenty of resources out there. There are plenty of other people out there doing it, and it might not seem like it. And that's probably because a lot of vegan parents don't want to admit that they're raising a vegan child because of all the backlash that people give vegan parents when they say that they're raising a vegan child, which is unfounded. But the support is out there, and you just have to find those resources, and just don't give in to the feeling of being alone, because you're definitely not. There's a huge community of people who want to raise vegan families. And let's be real, because of all of the environmental concerns, because of climate change, this is where we are headed. You are going to have a lot more people adopting this lifestyle, whether it's for animals, whether it's for health, or whether it's for the sake of the planet. So it's out there. You just gotta find the information in the communities.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I am excited for this podcast to go out there so that this can be one form of information and resources for people to turn to. And then for your book coming out, and then both of you have just like such rich, amazing social media platforms. I have so enjoyed watching them for, not even just watching, that sounds so weird, but like, engaging with your social media for a few years now. And Jen, you were like one of the first people that I stumbled across when I went vegan and was trying to figure out, like, how do I do this for myself, let alone have like a vegan pregnancy and then breastfeeding and just kind of every step of the way. So yeah, I will have all of your contact information, the social media, stuff like that, linked in the episode description so that people can find you as well. But are there any final things that you want to share or resources you would point people towards? And I can link those in as well.
Not necessarily a resource, but just something to take away is that we're going to make mistakes on this journey, whether it's in parenting, whether it's with veganism, and we can't beat ourselves up to the point that we're having like enormous amounts of negative self-talk, because it's not beneficial at all. We just have to learn from it. And I think that it's so beautiful when someone is able to call you in, not call you out and be disrespectful, but when someone's like, hey, like, did you know this? And this affects this in this particular way. And it's like, wow, like, thank you. I appreciate it. Like, it's one of the things that I love most about my community online is that I can get someone who I can very clearly tell has good intentions and it's trying to be informative and tell me something that maybe I said incorrectly, or maybe I worded it in a way that was disrespectful to a community, and I'm like, oh wow, thank you, like I appreciate that, and I can move on and learn from it and not take it as a bad thing. And I think that so much with being in the activism world or being in any space where you're trying to grow and improve, we feel like we have to be perfect. And if we're not perfect, then we ruined it. And especially when you have, more than 30 followers on Instagram, everything has to be curated and perfect and you can't mess up. And that's just not the reality. And just knowing that we are going to make mistakes and that we can learn from them and that other people can learn from them too. And that's super awesome when we when we express that we did make a mistake. We kind of mentioned that before with our kiddos, like they have to know that we make these mistakes, and other people have to know this, because otherwise people can get the wrong idea that these people are online are like these perfect, like can do no wrong creatures, when that's like the furthest thing from the truth. So just acknowledge the fact that you're going to make mistakes, but then know that you're going to learn from them too.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that is so true. I think what's worse than making a mistake is doubling down on it instead of just acknowledging that you made the mistake and working to improve it. So I thought that was fantastic advice. And just like one last, I guess, piece of advice, not necessarily a resource, but I know something that really helps keep my family, connected is like just tapping into our roots, So, my baby is Nigerian, Indian, Jamaican, and Black American. And so we make sure to like stock our kitchen with vegan cookbooks that tap into that rich food history of those cultures so that, he can grow up understanding oh, okay, cool. Like there are like my roots are rich in like vegan foods, and like this isn't abnormal. This isn't weird. This is a part of like my family history, and and he can grow up with a very advanced palate. Having experienced the different flavors and textures and just wonderful, colorful foods that come from the different cultures uh, that that he is made up of. So I'm really excited to be able to share, all the different cultures that are in our family with him, and other families should do the same. Really try to look for cookbooks that reflect your family history, and I think that's a special way to, connect your culture to your vegan values.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to, well, I'll reach out to both of you too, and see if you have any like favorite vegan cookbooks or something that you would want me to like share with our listeners. And I can put that as well in the episode description. But it has been such a joy to talk with you both and to hear your experiences and just like the wisdom that you have. Thank you for the work that each of you are doing in your own communities and on social media, reaching like a much broader audience too. So it is so meaningful and so needed. And I'm just really thankful to be able to share space with you both.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much for having us.
Of course. Here, I'm going to pause this recording real quick.